This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
So the Browns Nflpa report card, amongst everybody else's, was leaked to ESPN. I know, big shocker. If you don't know the background to this whole Nflpa report card, I'll fill you in real quick. So the Nflpa used to publish on their website a report card. This report card was basically a survey done from players on teams in the NFL, grading their teams on various different things, right? You know, how's the food, treatment of the facilities? Do you like your locker room? Do you like your coach, your coordinators? All of this stuff. You give it a grade and you submit it to the Nflpa. The Nflpa puts all these grades together, and then they release a report card. And that's how things have been done for about a few years. And then the NFL decided that they felt like the Nflpa publishing these report cards was unfair to them. So they sued in court about the report cards. I think they wanted them not to be done entirely. Like, they just did not like the idea of the grading here. And just so you guys understand, right, the reason why the NFLPA wants these report cards published, but just wants them in general, is to kind of be a watchdog to make sure NFL teams don't start doing what they call a race to the bottom. Right? We all know what a race to the bottom looks like in other industries, and it's not usually a good thing, right? I think the term for it online is Nflpa, where, you know, at first, a app will have all the features that you want, and it'll be amazing, and it'll be free and all of that. And then once they got you there, they lock you in and they start making the app worse because they're trying to make more money out of the app, right? You call it Nflpa online. In workspaces, it's called a race to the bottom, where companies are racing to offer the least amount possible to their workers in order to increase their profit margins as wide as possible. So the reason that they publish these report cards is because this kind of acts as a check on a race to the bottom. If you're a NFL owner, you don't like that some of your stuff has F's and D minuses. It makes you look broke to the other NFL owners, so you're more likely to replace it. One of the things that I will point to, right, the Browns weight room. For a long time, the Browns weight room was terrible. It was part of the indoor facility. It was bad. And it would get F grades every year. And guess what? The Browns just renovated. They just renovated the weight room, right? Because they were tired of getting those negative grades. That is the purpose of this report card, right? This is a report card from a players union about the perspective of players. And the reason that they have these report cards are to ensure that NFL owners aren't engaging in a race to the bottom, right? When it comes to the amenities and the employees that they put around NFL players. That is the purpose of it. And I think that context is very important to understand before we get into these report card grades. Because if you don't understand that, you'll think that these grades are something that they're not. But remember, the primary reason for these grades are to ensure that NFL owners are not racing to the bottom. That is why the NFL Players Union wants these grades out. So because the NFL does not want these grades, because this kind of stops them from racing to the bottom, they sued in court to make the NFLPA stop. The NFLPA won that you can do the report cards, but the NFL won that you can't publish the report cards directly if you're the NFLPA. So basically the way that the NFL won their case is that the report cards are still going to be done, but they're just not going to be published online by the NFLPA, which means that they're just going to leak out. And that's what happened. The NFLPA report cards were leaked out by somebody, probably the NFLPA. And now we have those grades available to us. If you want my opinion on this whole ordeal, it's a net loss for the NFL. Like like fighting the report cards in first makes them look like more shady than the NFL can really afford to look right now. So you take a hit from just looking ultra shady because why are you upset about report cards? And then 2, it puts more attention on the report cards because you're suing. It's a big news story. And then 3, now the way that this information gets out is completely in the control of media. And they're more likely to paint you in a negative light than the NFLPA was going to paint you. So now you've lost whatever level of control that there was, because even if you're the NFLPA, you're incentivized to still make sure that the brand of the NFL is strong, because the NFLPA doesn't exist without the NFL being a strong brand. So, complete L by the NFL and how they handled this. But the Browns report card leaked. We're going to look at all their grades. We're going to talk about all their grades. We're going to explain all their grades. But before I get into that, I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Talk to you guys real quick about Sleeper, the app for daily fantasy, regular fantasy. And now, if you look at the pick section on the Sleeper app and go to the team section, you have predictions that you can now use on the Sleeper app. You can choose winners of games. So let's say you're a Cavs fan, the Cavs play the Wizards or something like that, and you think the Cavs are going to beat the Wizards. You can pick the Cavs to beat the Wizards in that kind of scenario. For me personally, I went with the Cavs getting the championship this year. And of course, I had to throw in the same for the Cleveland Browns winning the next Super Bowl. So if you want to join in the fun on that, make sure you join the Sleeper app. If you also want to use the Sleeper app for all the other things I mentioned, make sure you use the promo code Worst Take. Get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Make sure you join the Sleeper app. All right, so let's look at these grades for the Cleveland Browns. Treatment of families. I remember this was bad last year. It's a D-. Home field grade, B-. The Browns are one of the few teams in the NFL that do play on natural grass. It is interesting, as much complaining as players have done about wanting to play on natural grass, that the Browns, who do play on Kentucky bluegrass, do not get a high grade. I'll talk about that later. I think there's more to that conversation about turf versus grass. I think people are willing to give it. Food and dining area, D+ there, not a great grade. Nutritionist and dietitian, C+. Locker room, F. I think that makes sense. I think the locker room's been in transition over the last few years because they're waiting to move into the new stadium. And also they're knocking things down to make more space for other things. It's kind of a mess there. Training room, C. Training staff, C+. Weight room, B+. We talked about that earlier. The Browns weight room had been a joke for like 3 years. I mean, like 4 years. Basically, it started in a pandemic where they moved the weight room out to the indoor facility, and that didn't go away for like 4 years for whatever reason. Strength coaches, B+, nice. Position coaches, B-, nice. Offensive coordinator, D+. That's interesting. Special teams coordinator, D. Defensive coordinator, A-. That makes sense, right? Jim Schwartz was well respected and is a good defensive coordinator. Tommy Reese, who's not our problem anymore, or Bubba Ventrone, not our problem anymore. Both got pretty poor grades. Team travel, D-. We'll talk about that. Head coach, C-. General manager and team ownership, C and C. Now, again, The context here is that these are the NFLPA grades, which come from players. I think that piece of context is important. What they are grading are these things from a player perspective, not necessarily a fan perspective. And even when you see grades for like offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, they might not necessarily be grading these guys on performance, as I think a lot of people assume when they see grades like this. They might just be grading these guys more on process, because if you're a player, you don't really interact with the results as much as you interact with the process. And here's what I mean by that. You win or lose a game, that's what it is. That's whether whose fault it was, we could blame it on whomever, but that's not really the factor that changes the grade, in my opinion. How you're treated day to day. How easy is it to get a hold of a coach if you have a question? How do coaches grade you in meeting rooms? What the process is overall for how players are treated is what players are usually grading here. So, there were some people who were surprised that like Aaron Glenn got a really good grade. He got an A grade from his players, because players are not grading the results. They're not grading the win-loss record. They're not grading the defensive EPA. They're grading the process. What they're telling to you when they give a D+ grade to the offensive coordinator is they don't like the process in which that man did his job, right? When they're giving an A- grade to a defensive coordinator, it means they enjoyed how the work was disseminated onto them, right? How, Jim Schwartz laid things out. It seemed pretty easy, pretty good to pick up, wasn't overly complicated, seemed to enjoy it. So it's more about the process here. And I think this speaks to why Kevin got fired, because again, the results were the results for this year. We didn't expect the Browns to be a great team. It wasn't the results that got Kevin fired. It was the process that got Kevin fired. And remember, Kevin's supposed to be a process-oriented guy. So when that fails, and that's the reason you're here, it makes a pretty clear message on what has to go. And it makes sense why they've been so focused on process with all the hires that they've brought in. Things start to make more sense when you view it in the right perspective, right? So again, just keep that in mind. Whenever you see a low grade for something, remember who's grading and remember what they're grading. It's the process of these things when it comes to the coaches. General manager grade was C. Team ownership grade was C. Head coach grade C-. So they thought for whatever reason Kevin was doing a worse job than Jimmy and Andrew Berry. I think there's something there, right? Again, it's about the process of it. How easy is it to get a hold of these guys? Do they answer your questions? Obviously, like general manager and ownership didn't get a great grade. But again, they're not grading on results. They're grading on process, which means something was not good in the line of communication for Kevin, or at least was worse for Kevin than it was for Andrew, and that there's room to improve with Andrew when it comes to communication. All right, so let's go through some of these grades individually and talk about them. Treatment of families, D-. I know exactly what this is about. The Browns don't have great facilities for the Browns stadium, especially, right? Because you got to think there are a couple of places where the family is going to interact with the player a lot, mainly during games, so the game day experience, and then also it's select practices. Now, I think the practice experience for most families I've talked to while I'm at training camp, they're fine with the practice experience. What they have issues with is the game day experience for families. Mainly like that the pickup area is not great. It's not well defined. And I think it's like outside, so you're exposed to the elements. This is something only a new stadium can fix. And I think the new stadium will fix this. Also, there's kind of like these other smaller benefits that player families get in some teams that they don't get in Cleveland. Cleveland seems to not have the most generous package for families. which is unfortunate. I wish that the Browns would, they open up the purse strings on so many things. You might as well try to be first class in this area too. But yeah, they don't offer the kindest package to families. I've heard that complaint plenty. Some of this stuff will get fixed with the new stadium. I think the pickup drop-off area is a big point of contention with families. That will change. But some of this stuff won't. Food and dining area, D+. I don't get this, man. I don't get why NFL teams get so cheap here. Just offer some good goddamn food. Maybe it's because of like the nutrition plan that they're on, and maybe that changes with Todd Monken because, that's part of the head coach's purview is what kind of nutrition plan and the dietitian and all of that and the kind of food being served in the dining area. Maybe there's a method behind this, but the Browns haven't been good, so, it might as well give them good food, right? The same thing with nutrition, dietitian, that can change. Locker room grades, F, that's going to change with the new stadium because they'll have their permanent lockers, I think, are going to be at the new stadium because it's much closer to Berea. And then also, so that'll make the lockers that they have in Berea temporary. And that locker room that they have in Berea right now is just super crowded. It just doesn't have the space that it needs to have, and they need to update that. The training staff, C+, it's fine. Weight room, B+, we talked about that. Strength coaches, position coaches, we talked about the coordinator grades. Team travel, I think I talked to Daniel about this on Twitter, and he mentioned that they felt like the flights were cramped, and that the travel schedules were funky. Now, the travel schedules can change with Todd Monken. I think that's something that the head coach can change there because the head coach has that control. So if we're looking at like grades on this thing that are like in control of the head coach, I'll show you them. Treatment of families, not really the head coach's thing. That's really more JW. But home game, not the home game field. The home game field's not really in that coach's control, but food dining area, that is something in control of the head coach, especially nutrition dietitian. So the food dining area, if they're just referring to like the cafeteria, not in the coach's purview, but the nutrition and dietitian, certainly in the coach's purview. Locker room can sometimes be related to coach because like coaches can take shit out of the locker room because they feel like players are having too much fun. The big story about the Ravens taking like the pool table out the locker room or whatever it was. So sometimes that's related to coach. Training room, training staff, not really. Well, training staff is related to coach, but that's more of an organizational thing in Cleveland. Weight room, strength coaches, obviously in relationship to the coach. Position coaches, obviously in relation to the coach. Offensive and defensive and special teams coordinator. Team travel, that's also something that reflects on the coach, right? Because the coach gets to decide when do we leave, what are the plans, even down to what hotels we stay in. Do we want to be near the city center of the place that we're playing, or do we want our guys away from the city center? Stuff like that, the coach does get to choose there. The Browns players did not like the team travel thing. Part of it is because the plane's a little cramped, and I think that's because, the Browns have added more and more people who fly on these planes, so the planes have gotten more crowded. So either they need to get a bigger plane or they need to get another plane. That's not going to change soon. But the other part of it is like the schedule. I imagine Todd Monken is going to be a little bit more resistant to trying out some of these newfangled ideas that Kevin was trying out when it comes to team travel, right? So, especially if they're not well received. So I imagine that grade will get better by next year too. But all in all, we can look at these grades. I don't know what they really teach us about what or why things happen on the field for the Cleveland Browns, right? The offensive coordinator grade being what it is kind of funny to me because that's the same offensive coordinator and head coach they brought over to Atlanta. So I wonder what those grades are going to look like next year. But yeah, it's just important to keep in perspective that these are player grades and they're grading the process of things. And, you're looking at the grades that are the lowest here. these are areas in which the Browns have sought to make changes, whether it be personnel or facility-wise. That all being said, I wouldn't really react too harshly one way or the other to this. I don't think this really is a diagnostic on the season. I think this is just a fun thing to look into and to get a peek into the perspective of players and what it's like to work for the Cleveland Browns as a football player and what their perspective is. But I don't think it's useful as a insightful thing about what the Brown season went, however it went. I don't think there's really any insight there, in my opinion. But thank you guys for watching. You guys have a great day. Having a better night. Peace.